So thank you for joining today's session. My name is Caitlin Giles McCormick, here with the Economic Development Authority. Today's session is an informational overview on the Local Property Acquisition Grant Program. The goal of this program and the eligible applicants is very specific, and the presenters will go into detail about that eligibility. But if you aren't eligible, please keep in mind some of your partners that may be eligible, and make sure to check out our other NJEDA programs and products. Now I'm going to send it over to my colleague to get into the content presentation of today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We have launched this program to address the challenge that municipalities and nonprofit organizations have. Too often, when trying to advance projects that are important to your community, there are vacant private properties standing in the way. Either the owners are unwilling to develop those properties or unable to do so. There are also situations where the owners could be located among several, could have a property that's located among several contiguous properties. If those properties were assembled, could lead to an impactful project. So we believe there are instances where it makes sense for the municipality or nonprofit to acquire and control the destiny of these properties. We also know that it's difficult for you to access funding to acquire private property, and we are delighted to make this tool available. We are also delighted to see that there's plenty of interest in this program, judging by today's attendance. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Liza Nolan, our Director of Real Estate Programs. She will give an overview of the program and will answer questions. Let me acknowledge that some of you have already submitted thoughtful questions that we are still reviewing. So we won't be able to answer all the questions today, but we plan to do so within the next couple of weeks around the middle of February. Also, finally, I just want to acknowledge the presence of our Chief Real Estate Officer, George Santos, and also Giancarlo Di Leonardo, who has worked closely with Liza to administer this effort. So Liza?
Thank you, Dan. I'll start with an overview of the program and then go into some of the specifics. So there is $24 million available from EDA for project funding. This was part of Governor Murphy's budget appropriation. The program is designed around addressing one of the barriers, as Dan mentioned, to undertaking local projects, and that's basically property acquisition. The program will provide grants to eligible applicants, as we'll go through that, for the property acquisition of a vacant site, building, facility, or collection of properties. And as we talk through this, there are going to be two funding categories that we'll describe, one of which is acquisitions for strategic public use, and the second is acquisitions for future development projects. Little bit of the background of where we are. Some of you may have attended the session we had in the summer as we were putting this program together. We held a listening session, and then in October, the NJEDA board approved the program structuring. We were able to launch the application last week, so there's an online portal, and today we have the informational webinar. The application period is open for approximately 4 months, and the deadline is May 20th at 5 p.m. All the information is on EDA's website, and we do encourage, as Dan mentioned, we've already received questions, but all questions that you have can be sent to our realestateInfo@njeda.gov or com. They both work, sorry. And we will answer them that way. We do put together a number of questions, and we are in process of uploading that to the website shortly. Eligible applicants. There are two categories of applicants: the governmental applicants, municipalities or municipal entities, counties or county entities that would include local entities, redevelopment or improvement authorities on a county or local level. And also the second category are not-for-profit local community and economic development entities. As is typical with all EDA programs, applicants must be in good standing with the state. We undertake, or the applicant submits, a tax clearance, and we check with our sister agency departments, Department of Labor, Department of Environmental Protection, to make sure the applicants are in good standing. As part of the applicants and the approval process, we do want to have projects funded throughout the state of New Jersey and different municipalities in geographic locations. So we do have criteria of maximum of 2 grant awards per applicant. And then we also have a maximum number of projects that could be approved per municipality. It gets a little complicated, but basically we do have 2 products that we describe: projects that will result in strategic public use, or projects that will be a future development project. And in most municipalities, there could be 1 project approved in each product category, except for those municipalities, per the board memo, that are located in GRM communities or transitional aid. There could be a maximum of 2 projects per product category. Next slide. The budget, as we mentioned, there was $25 million allocated in Governor Murphy's budget appropriation. EDA is authorized to take up to 5% of that for our administrative fee running the program. So we anticipate $24 million being available to fund projects. And we further break that down, that approximately $3 million would be available for those acquisitions that promote strategic public use projects, and approximately $21 million for acquisitions for future development projects. Some of the funding parameters are such that we would fund up to 80% of the appraised value of the property, plus the related closing costs. Or if a project is located in a transitional aid or government restricted municipality, we could fund up to 100% of the acquisition cost appraised value plus the closing costs. The minimum funding for the whole program is $50,000. So applications would be submitted with a minimum request for $50,000. Maximum funding varies depending on the product. $4 million for the acquisitions for future development projects, and $1 million max for acquisitions for the strategic public use projects. So let's talk about those 2 different products. And when we go through the application, you'll see that you'll check off which one you're applying for and what the criteria are for submitting or describing each of those potential projects under each product category. So the acquisitions for strategic public use was set up to support projects that would be publicly accessible within the community. They might include pedestrian plazas or pocket parks, or even public parking lots or garages or walkways, again, promoting public access. We also say other similar public spaces. You could describe what that might be. This product does not fund projects that are basically public infrastructure projects, such as for transportation, energy, communication, or water, or other utilities, general public works. It's supposed to be for projects that would be publicly accessible and promote public use. The second type of category is for acquisitions for future development projects. Again, this funding will provide for the property acquisition, but the intent of the program is to promote reuse of properties. So there would be a requirement that there is going to be future development of the projects. This would Funding would be available for a variety of possible projects. It might be mixed-use developments. Again, if residential components typical to EDA funding would require that at least 20% of the residential units be reserved for low and moderate income households. Transit-oriented development projects, again, following that residential component requirement for low and moderate income households. This program also might support cultural arts or performing arts projects in development, supermarkets, grocery stores, commercial or research and laboratory. This program and this specific product would not fund projects that are consisting solely of warehouse uses or for 100% residential development, or are primarily for government or educational uses. Let's talk a little bit about some of the program highlights or the parameters behind this. As stated, this is funding for the acquisition of the properties. So if a property has already been purchased, this is not a reimbursement program, and that would not be eligible for this program or for this funding. Also, we would not provide funding for the purchase of government-owned property. As I previously mentioned, this does require, and you'll see in the application slides that we'll talk through, it requires that there is a plan for a future use, a future development, redevelopment of the property, depending on the category that you're applying for. This is not for land banking. So we do have, and the board memo outlines that it is anticipated that projects, the acquisition of the properties would occur within 18 months of EDA approval, and that the overall future use project, whether it's a strategic public use or one of the future development projects like a mixed use project, that would occur within 3 years of acquiring the property. Our funds pay for the property acquisition, and the closing costs does not provide funding, any funding for that future use, future development, but it is required that there is going to be a future development. Also, with most and almost all EDA projects, prevailing wage and other state requirements are part of the program. Affirmative action, labor standards compliance, and depending on the size and parameters of the project, Executive Order 215, which deals with environmental reviews, might also be a requirement. And we would outline some of those requirements after funding approval once we know the parameters of the project. EDA will have a grant agreement with the applicant describing what the timelines are based on the EDA approval and what was submitted in the application. We would also have deed restrictions in the grant agreement, talking about the prevailing wage requirements and other things that we had. But the deed restrictions not only talk about the time frame under which the future projects need to be redeveloped, as well as the initial property acquisition, but there are also requirements that were outlined in the board memo that describe future sale and pricing of that future sale. So there would be a right for EDA to review the future sale of that property if it were to occur for the future development or reuse of the property. We would look at that sales price compared to the current fair market value and based on appraisal, and the overall financial project financials of that future use to ensure that the future sale is not resulting in funds that are not needed for that future sale. The board memo outlines some of the requirements for us to look at those pricing elements and allowing for the municipality or the applicant to retain some of the funding for the costs involved in that future sale. But if the pricing exceeds the appraised value and the project financials are evidence capacity, we would recapture some of the funding of that future sale pricing. Next. As I wasn't sure if this was mentioned, but this is a competitive scoring application process. Once the applications are received on the deadline, EDA staff would undertake a review of the applications, and we would establish an evaluation scoring committee and review the application based on these factors. The project concept and the proposal for the acquisition of the property, as well as the supplemental future use. What would be the location and local impact for undertaking such a project, the experience and capacity of the applicant, the timeline readiness to proceed with the property acquisition. So that initial acquisition that we do anticipate would occur within 18 months, but certainly could occur sooner. And then also the viability and the reasonableness of the proposed timeline for that future project, that supplemental use, whether it's for a mixed use, mixed income property or project, or for a strategic public use. Next. The application is online currently. Some of you may have already seen that on our webpage. When you go into it, we'll talk through the elements of it, but there is a common application portal. There is project-specific documentation that is required. Again, keep in mind, as we just shared with you, the scoring criteria by which applications will be evaluated. The documentation you provide should provide enough details so that we can score based on those categories. And upon the end of the application period on May 20th, we would undertake our scoring and review process. We would reach out to applicants for missing information or clarifications that might be necessary to make sure we have complete application materials to review and score appropriately. After scoring, all potential projects that are to be funded or to be denied would be presented to the EDA board. And to go through the application, I'll turn it over to Giancarlo.
Thank you, Liza, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to go through the application, the sample application. I will not focus on the slides, the portion of the application which is commonly referred to as the Common App, the generic questions that the EDA asks of all applicants. I'm going to focus our attention today on the specific areas relevant to the local property acquisition program. When you open the application, there's a welcome page which outlines specifics about the program. It again provides additional detail about both the acquisitions for strategic public use as well as the acquisitions for future development projects that Liza described. If the applicant, you or someone filling it out for you needs language assistance, there's also resources located at the bottom of this page for those folks. Please, this is an important tip. It's on the bottom of the slide. You can save your application as you go through it and create a reusable link to continue your progress as you go. That is a helpful tool, and please consider doing your application over a period of time so you're not rushing to put it all in toward the end of the application window. The next slide here is about the local property acquisition funding selection. So Liza mentioned earlier, you will select which intended supplemental use you will have. There is a drop down on this page that you will select between the strategic public use or future development. If you are interested in applying for both, you would need to submit 2 separate applications. It's an important caveat here. You cannot submit a project for strategic public use and a future development in the same application. They need to be separate applications where you would select strategic public use on one and a future development project on another one. Specifically for acquisitions for strategic public use, Liza mentioned these are the eligible categories, different things that you could select through the strategic public use. This is what the page would look like as you're filling it out. Again, remember there are ineligible uses here. So if you are proposing a similar public space, as Liza mentioned. Just remember that in your description, it cannot include one of the ineligible items that were mentioned earlier. Okay, for future development, again, similar, there are 3 different types of construction that you would do, whether it's new construction, a substantial rehabilitation, or a substantial rehabilitation with new construction. We ask you to select that. And then as you continue, if you're selecting a mixed use development and you are having a residential portion of the project, you would be asked to submit the number of total units and the number of units that would be affordable. Remember, at least 20% of projects with EDA funding need to be reserved for low and moderate income households. Okay, I'm going to get into the project overview. This is an opportunity for you to not only upload information, but also fill in text boxes. We do ask for the information about the site to be acquired. So please add the address, please add block and lot. If you are selecting or if you're putting in an application that would include more than one property, we ask you, there is something on here to add additional addresses, additional block and lots. So please do that. There's a drop down for the zip code, for city, for municipality. Please select the appropriate one. It'll help us review your application appropriately. Now, in terms of the narrative for the project, upload your overall proposal. And again, that proposal needs to include certain information. It's written on the application, but I'm going to go through a couple of things here. Your proposal must include a detailed description of the property or buildings as they currently are, a description of the neighborhood and the surrounding area, proposed benefits of the property acquisition and the supplemental use you're proposing, and any projected job creation. We're asking you to also respond to the questions that are below. You'll see several of them here. And there are several resources that are available and helpful hints, that are located on some of these questions. For a question involving whether the property is within or near federal and state incentive areas, our partners over at the Department of Community Affairs have what they call a community asset map that you can use. We do include a link to that. But if you are a municipality or if you are a county, you may be aware of some of these incentive areas and you may know this information off the top of your head. If you don't know, I believe we also have an opportunity for you to select unknown for that question. So acquisition budget and timeline. In this section, we really want to understand your ability to cover the project costs, again, that acquisition cost, and your plans for completing the project on schedule. If you have done an appraisal on the property that you're intending to acquire, you can upload that appraisal here. We will review that. There is a budget template, a project budget template provided in this application that you can download, fill out, and resubmit, and input any project costs before uploading it as an Excel file. And again, remember, grant funding may not exceed 80% of the property appraised value plus closing costs. Typically, and those costs are typically included as part of a settlement statement and related transaction legal costs, except if you're in a transitional aid community or a government restricted municipality, that funding may account for up to 100% of your appraised value, property appraised value plus closing costs. Okay, the second part of the budget and timeline section of the application also includes a project sources and uses template that you can download and fill out. And this would be your projected costs for the supplemental use project and how you anticipate funding any gap or any development that you are planning to do. For every project, you will be asked to provide anticipated dates for the completion of the acquisition, the date of any approvals from the municipality or receiving a permit, your anticipated construction start date, and your final inspection CO date, certificate of occupancy date for those who are doing buildings. So that is a requirement. We'll ask you to to provide those anticipated dates. As I mentioned earlier, the ability of your team to carry out the work, that's a portion of your scoring. We do want to understand your team's prior relevant work experience and the competencies of the team to ensure that this is a successful project. So applicants should upload a chart with information about projects they've completed in the last 5 years. You know, if the project has a name, the location, address, start date, completion date, acquisition cost, total development costs, and any other relevant information that you would like to provide. This is an upload. There is some helpful help text on this slide, on this part of the application, but we ask you to please provide that in addition to what's typical for EDA about an organizational chart, resumes, and any other documentation about the project team handling this project. Evidence of site control or a path to site control is an upload document. You actually do have a drop down as well. This may include a letter of intent, a purchase offer with terms, purchase and sale agreement contingent on funding award. We also recognize that some government entities may have worked through a settlement agreement on an eminent domain proceeding or other administrative process with the courts. That's something that we will also accept. But if you are selecting that, if that is the case, please select purchase offer with purchase terms and upload documentation about that. We are also asking all applicants, whether you are a government entity or a not-for-profit, to upload a municipal letter of support for the project that you are applying for. This is an acknowledgement that all applicants are required to read and acknowledge about prevailing wage and affirmative action requirements. And this is something that you will have to acknowledge before proceeding with the application. Liza also mentioned some of the other acknowledgements, program acknowledgements, whether they have to do with the grant agreement or the authority's rights about a sale or transfer of property. We are repeating them here, and applicants will be asked to acknowledge them before proceeding with the application. There is a $1,000 non-refundable application fee that's required of this program. We are accepting payment by credit card for this. Once you hit submit on the application, you will receive an email to the primary point of contact for the application with instructions to make that payment. The payment must be completed prior to May 20th, 2024 at 5 p.m. in order for your application to be reviewed. So please make sure that that is in. Municipalities and municipal entities that are within the top 10% of all municipalities statewide in the Municipal Revitalization Index, again, which is linked. It's an index that the Department of Community Affairs administers, can apply for a hardship waiver for that fee. And again, that's for municipalities and municipal entities only. And any questions can be relayed to us through our real estate info at njeda.com or .gov email address. And there are some other programs that are at the EDA, so please take a look at those as well. I think we'll pause and take questions.
Yes, thanks, Giancarlo. So I see some questions that have been put into the question and answer box. So I'll start to go through some of those. There's a question relating to where to find prevailing wage rates for residential construction in New Jersey. The New Jersey Department of Labor has information and will send the link out to you regarding that. This is, again, 100% construction for residential purposes only is not eligible under this program, but a mixed-use project would be. Please keep in mind also that part of the prevailing wage requirement is such that the contractor must be registered through the Department of Labor as a public works contractor, or so that your contractor, once you work with them, should have that information about the prevailing wage rates. But again, we'll send the link to the Department of Labor site. Another question related to a nonprofit and a for-profit. So our funding for this program is for the acquisition of the property. So eligible applicants are the municipal or county entities and/or a not-for-profit. The future development project might involve a for-profit real estate developer, but that is not for our funding, that's for the future development. So I'm not going to answer exactly a joint venture structure, but hopefully have provided some information as to what the applicant can apply for here, but then describe what the future project might be. If there are specific questions about a potential use, we'll try to look into that offline and provide details in a question and answer. Whether a parking lot that might include some charging stations, we did indicate that a strategic public use could be for parking or parking garage. And so if it did have a component that included some kind of charging stations, that would not make it ineligible. The transportation elements of public infrastructure would be for something that would just be like a street improvement or something like that, not something that has transportation EV chargers. I'm trying to go through questions, so if anyone else, Giancarlo or Dan, see any, feel free to chime in.
No, the only thing I want to just emphasize about the parking lot, it has to be a public parking lot, right? It can't be a parking lot that serves like just a project, a residential project or a commercial project.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, a mixed use development sounds fine. Like a project can have residential. We want to be clear about that. It just can't be solely residential.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question about not-for-profits also incurring the $1,000 application fee. Yes, the waiver is available only for municipalities and municipal entities. So that is a requirement for not-for-profits.
Mm-hmm. A question is asked about the fact that we mentioned prevailing wage for the construction. So yes, our funds only go for the property acquisition, but because the purpose of this program is to promote future development, even though our funds are not providing funding for that future development, prevailing wage is required on that future development. And yes, when they would be paid throughout that construction project, future development.
Also, I see there are a couple of questions regarding a nonprofit partnering with a private developer. So we're going to answer that question, confirm the answer when we post to the website program website. My preliminary feeling about that one is if the nonprofit applies and ultimately partners with a private developer, we would need to approve that partnership. But again, we will give you the answer to that when we post to the website.
I want to remind people, because a few questions seem to relate to this topic, but keep in mind the scoring criteria that we outlined. So timing for acquiring the site is important. Timing and planning and the reasonableness of the proposed future development is important. The capacity and experience of the team of the applicant and who else they're including in their team is important. And then the overall project concept, location, and the impact of that are the key are the criteria outlined here. So questions relating to that, please continue to look at that scoring criteria and make sure when you submit information in answering the questions or filling in the boxes online, but also in the narratives or details that you might provide as an upload document, make sure that you are expansive in trying to make sure we understand how you would be able to proceed with the project, what experience you bring to the table, and what impact the project would have. Part of this does require that the property is identified. We're not just going to give out funds for a unidentified property to be acquired. So that's why you might just have a letter of intent to purchase, or you might even have a purchase and sale agreement. But yes, the property would need to be identified. And then also that's part of the understanding as to how ready you are to proceed and what the property and the intent would be as far as the impact and the overall project concept for the future reuse of that property.
Liza, there's a question about combining this grant with county open space or green acres funding. And just as a note, I believe I mentioned there's a project template that you need to upload about the acquisition and the costs that would go with that. If you are, especially if you are someone who's having to deal with the 80% rule of appraised value, you are required to outline where the rest of the funding will come from. If other public money is used to do that, that would be allowable. But if there are any other restrictions tied to those funds, that would be the one thing. So you may need to be sure about any duplication of benefits or any other requirements for those pieces of funding, but you would have other dollars that would need to go into the project for the acquisition.
Thank you. There is a question relating to the number of applications. As mentioned, the maximum would be 2 per applicant, but then further, there are maximums per municipality that could get funded. So we would not limit an applicant from submitting 2 applications for the same type of project, either strategic public use or future development project. However, if the application is located in a municipality that is not a transitional aid or a government restricted municipality, only one can get funded from each type of product in such a municipality. So I just again read through. This is a competitive application. So we do expect a number of interested parties to submit applications, and the funding, I think, will be very useful to promoting a lot of local development, but it will be very competitive.
Liza, there's a lot of questions around residential projects, residential developments. Again, to repeat, their projects cannot be 100% residential in nature. They have to be mixed use. So that's an answer to several questions that are on here. There is also a question about the maximum percentage of residential units in a project for mixed income projects. If funding is coming from the NJEDA, a minimum of 20% of units need to be affordable for low and moderate income individuals in order to qualify for this funding.
Let me describe a little bit. Someone asked about the timeline. So the application deadline is May 20th. Following the deadline, applications will be reviewed for completeness and threshold eligibility. And then, as mentioned, EDA staff will form an evaluation committee to score the applications. We may reach out to applicants if clarification is necessary, but all applications would be presented to the board for either funding approval or denial. Following a board approval, then EDA would enter into the grant agreement that I mentioned to you that would detail the requirements of the program funding, reference the timelines, and reference some of the requirements related to prevailing wage or other state requirements, as well as deed restrictions related to this future sale and or pricing. All this information, as Caitlin mentioned, is the webinar is being recorded and will be on our site, and also this slide deck will be on the site. Hopefully, most of you have accessed our webpage, which has the application portal, the program board information, as well as a sample application, some of which John Carlo went through today to help provide detailed information and some helpful tips as you're filling that out.
Liza, there's a question about the future development projects.
Okay.
They do not need to include a residential component. That is one potential use within the future development projects. I believe we went through that earlier, and I will pull that up on the screen as we talk. The eligible uses, excuse me. We talked about mixed use developments, could be one with a residential component if you'd like, transit oriented developments, cultural arts, performing arts, grocery stores, supermarkets, commercial or office space, research, and laboratory. Those are the eligible uses under future development projects.
Mm-hmm. This is a pilot program that was funded through the state budget allocation. So we anticipate that it certainly will be competitive and that we will be able to allocate all the funds. So at this point, it would be the 25 million that's available. We do not anticipate or know at this time that there would be any funding next year, someone asked about. Again, this program is very different than some of the other EDA programs. We are providing funding for the acquisition of the property. And the acquisition of the property is by a municipal or county government or entity and or a local nonprofit. The future project can be by one of those entities or another developer, but our funding is for the property acquisition. So if the property has been acquired or it's not part of a plan for future development, that is not what this program would be funding. As far as property acquisition and evidence of site control, which we ask one of the questions in the application, we do indicate that there might be a means by which there is a settlement for tax foreclosure or another legal proceeding. And if you can evidence site control in that manner, that might be a way to submit documentation to us as part of the application. So we list that out in the application as a possible route to evidence site control. And yes, our funds only pay for property acquisition and related closing costs. I know we're all trying to read the questions, so give us a minute as we look through and see which ones we may not have answered yet. And as we mentioned, we have received some questions already and encourage people to submit questions in writing to the realestateInfo@NJEDA email box. We have started to draft FAQ, frequently asked questions, which include the questions that are asked and responses to them. We are about to post our first batch soon, and then we'll be aggregating other questions as they come in and post again. And we do hope to receive all questions soon and then post all within the next short period of time, few weeks.
Also, I see a couple of questions regarding EDA products for construction of projects. So we do have Aspire. We have a product for historically eligible buildings. We have a product to clean up contaminated sites. So if you want more information, just send an email your information to the real estate inbox, or you can email me directly at Dan Jennings at eda.gov.
All of the eligible uses that are listed would be considered for the future development projects. So that is up to the applicants to determine which is the best use of the project and describe that as part of the application proposal, as well as how and what impact it would have locally and what economic development would result in for that community. Okay. I'm kind of seeing we've answered a lot of the questions. We will have a link to the GRM and transitional aid communities, or on our website. We can put that up there in the FAQ.
Yep.
And again, there is information in our FAQ regarding construction and prevailing wage and the requirement for contractor registration. So we'll post that soon.
Yep. There is a link on the application to the DCA's community asset map for the person who asked about the state and federal incentive areas. You can also go onto the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs website. It's called the Community Asset Map, and it is available there.
Mixed income, or I'm sorry, mixed use residential projects would typically include some number of the residential units and a use that is not just for those residents. So a question was asked about a community center. If the community center is just for the residents, that's not necessarily a mixed use project. But if it is open to the public, or it has a commercial space or something like that, that could be considered mixed use. I hope I answered that question adequately. Okay.
Some of the other questions look to be a little bit more specific that may need their own response. So if we did not answer your question, we will receive the questions at the close of this session, and we'll be able to respond to those folks individually or as part of our Q&A document.
Yes, and as we mentioned, a recording of this will be posted on the website, as well as the slide presentation. So that'll happen in the next few days for anyone who wants to go back and check, or if people joined late and did not hear the whole presentation.
Any last minute questions or anything? Are we good to go, Liza and company?
I think Giancarlo and I know are checking. So I think we touched on most of them, or as Giancarlo mentioned, there are some very specific that it's hard to answer in a setting like this. So we will take them under advisement and post questions and answers, including the ones we received here today, into a document on the website on the program page.
Well, with that, if you're okay ending the session, I don't want to rush it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so. We appreciate everyone's interest in the program. We are looking forward to applications. We continue, if you do have questions, please send them to our real estate info at njeda.gov mailbox, and we will post responses. Again, we know we've received a lot of questions so far, and we are hoping to post responses to those very shortly, and then we'll add on other questions in batches going forward.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.